The red dust of Achi swirled in the evening breeze as young Johnson walked the familiar path from the lecture halls to his modest lodging. The laterite soil clung to his worn sandals, each step marking another day closer to his destiny, though he did not yet know it. In the distance, the call to evening prayers echoed from the mosque, while from another direction, church bells chimed their own sacred summons. This was Nigeria, where faiths danced together in an ancient rhythm, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in tension. Johnson, wait now. The voice belonged to his roommate, Chiamaka, whose Igbo accent colored every English word like palm wine flavoring water. Johnson turned, his lean frame casting a long shadow in the amber light of the setting sun. At 19, he possessed the quiet intensity of one who had learned early that words carried weight, that silence often spoke louder than speech. "You day run away from life, my brother?" Chiamaka panted as he caught up, his textbooks clutched against his chest like armor. "That girl, Fatima, the one from political science, she has been asking about you again. And that other one, Sarah from mass communication. Even the Yoruba girl, Adani, she greet you today with that special smile, you know the one." Johnson's eyes, dark pools that seemed to hold depths his young age should not possess, remained fixed on the horizon where the sun painted the sky in shades of ancestral fire. "Chiamaka, some paths are not meant to be walked together." "Ah, listen to this one," Chiamaka laughed, but his laughter held a note of concern. "We are in university, not seminary. Even Moses married, even David had wives. You cannot tell me say you don't feel anything when these beautiful sisters pass by." They reached the small room they shared in the overcrowded student hostel, a concrete box that had witnessed countless dreams, failures, and transformations. The walls bore witness to their late-night discussions about philosophy, religion, and the heavy weight of expectations that pressed down on every young Nigerian like the humid air before the rains. Johnson sat on his narrow bed, his fingers tracing the worn cover of his Bible, not in religious display, but in the way a drummer might touch his instrument before a performance. "Chiamaka, let me tell you something my grandmother told me before she passed." The room grew quiet. Even the usual cacophony of hostel life, the blasting music, the heated arguments about football, the clicking of typewriters as students worked on assignments, seemed to hush in reverence for the memory about to be shared. "She called me to her bedside that last evening," Johnson began, his voice taking on the cadence of the storytellers who had passed down wisdom through generations. The rains had come early that year, drumming on the zinc roof like ancestors announcing their presence. She held my hand, her skin like dried leaves, but her grip still strong with purpose. Chiamaka shifted on his bed, recognizing the sacred quality of the moment. She said, "Johnson, you carry something in your spirit that is bigger than your body can contain. The ancestors whisper your name in the wind. But gifts like yours come with a price." Her eyes, Chiamaka, her eyes seemed to look through time itself. "The path you must walk requires sacrifices that others will not understand. Love will come to you but not in the season you expect. First, you must learn who you are when you stand alone with God." The evening call to prayer rose again from the mosque, interweaving with the distant sound of a praise team practicing at the Christian Fellowship Center. Nigeria's spiritual complexity wrapped around them like a familiar wrapper. "But Johnson," Chiamaka said softly, "surely she didn't mean you should be like a monk in your youth?" Johnson rose and moved to the small window that overlooked the campus. Below, he could see couples walking hand in hand, their young love shining in their faces like newly minted coins. For a moment, just a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of solitude. 3 months ago, he continued, something happened that confirmed her words. It was during the Harmattan season, when the dusty winds from the Sahara painted everything in sepia tones and made the air taste of distance and longing. Johnson had been returning from his evening prayers in the small chapel behind the library, a place few students knew existed, where he went to wrestle with the growing certainty that his life would not follow conventional paths. Sarah Adebayo sat on the steps, her head in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She was arguably the most sought-after girl in the mass communication department, intelligent, graceful, with the kind of beauty that made other students pause mid-conversation when she walked by. Her Yoruba heritage showed in the elegant way she carried herself, like royalty remembering their kingdom. "Sister Sarah?" Johnson's voice carried genuine concern. "Are you well?" She looked up and he saw that her eyes, usually bright with ambition and laughter, were wells of pain. "Johnson, I didn't know anyone came here." He sat beside her, maintaining respectful distance, the way his mother had taught him to honor women. "This place calls to those who need peace. What troubles your spirit?" The words came tumbling out like water from a broken calabash. Her father had discovered her relationship with a boy from another tribe. The family was threatening to withdraw her from university, to marry her off to a much older man who could bring honor back to the family name. Everything she had worked for, her dreams of becoming a journalist, of telling the stories that needed telling, was crumbling like sand in the harmattan wind. "I thought," she whispered, "I thought maybe, if someone like you, someone respected, someone spiritual, if you would agree to court me properly, my father might reconsider. People listen to you, Johnson. Even the lecturers speak of you with respect." Johnson felt the temptation like a physical weight. Sarah was not just beautiful, she was intelligent, driven, a woman who could stand beside any man as an equal partner. The conventional path stretched before him: courtship, marriage after graduation, children, a comfortable life serving God in traditional ways. But as he looked at her hopeful face, another image superimposed itself. His grandmother's ancient eyes, the weight of prophecies not yet fulfilled, the sense that he was being prepared for something that required his complete attention and dedication. "Sarah," he said gently, "if I agreed to what you ask, I would be saving you from one trap only to lead you into another. My path. I cannot yet see where it leads, but I know it will demand everything. To ask you to walk it with me would be unfair to the woman you are meant to become." Her face crumpled, but through her tears, she nodded slowly. "You carry something heavy, don't you? Even now, I can see it in your eyes. Like you're listening to voices the rest of us can't hear." Back in the hostel room, Chiamaka sat in thoughtful silence as Johnson finished his story. 2 weeks later, Johnson continued, Sarah found the courage to stand up to her father. She chose her own path, finished her degree with honors, and now works for one of the national newspapers. When I see her in town, she thanks me, not for rejecting her, but for refusing to be her easy escape. "And the other girls?" Chiamaka asked. "Each situation taught me something. Fatima, brilliant, devout, would have made any man proud to call her wife. But when I prayed about it, I felt only emptiness where there should have been confirmation. A dunny with her quick wit and generous heart, the same emptiness. Not because they were lacking, but because I am not yet the man I am meant to be." Johnson moved to his small desk where his notebooks lay open. His handwriting filled the pages, not just class notes but sermons, prayers, philosophical reflections that poured from him like water from a spring. "Last month, something extraordinary happened," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I was alone in the chapel deep in prayer when I felt presence. Not just God's presence but something else. Ancestors maybe. Spiritual elders. And a voice, clear as your voice now, said, 'Your time of preparation is almost complete. Soon you will be called to speak words that will shake the foundations of complacency. But first you must know yourself completely.'" Chiamaka felt goosebumps rise on his arms despite the evening heat. "Johnson, you don't think you're going mad, do you?" Johnson laughed, a sound like water over stones. "Perhaps. But if this is madness, it's the kind that changes the world. Look at the prophets of old, the great spiritual leaders. How many of them followed conventional paths in their youth? How many of them sacrificed immediate pleasures for long-term purpose? The night sounds of campus life swirled around them. Generators humming, students arguing about politics, the distant sound of drums from a traditional dance practice. Nigeria breathed around them in all its complex, contradictory glory. But what if you're wrong? Chiamaka pressed. What if God wants you to experience love, family, the normal joys of life? Johnson was quiet for a long moment, his fingers again tracing the cover of his Bible. "Then I will have made a beautiful mistake. But Chiamaka, I have learned to recognize the difference between the voice of fear and the voice of calling. Fear asks, what if you're missing out? Calling says, what if you're right on time?" As if to test his resolve, the very next day brought the greatest challenge yet. Her name was Chiamaka, God is beautiful, and she lived up to every syllable. An Igbo girl from a wealthy family in Onitsha, she had come to study law with the fierce determination of someone who had never been told she couldn't achieve anything she set her mind to. She approached Johnson after a fellowship meeting where he had delivered what others called one of his most powerful messages, a sermon on the cost of authentic faith that had left even the most skeptical students nodding in recognition of deeper truths. "Johnson," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her mother tongue beneath the English words, "I need to speak with you privately." They walked to a quiet corner of the campus, near the old mango tree that had been standing since before the university was built. The tree had witnessed generations of students, their hopes and fears, their love stories and heartbreaks. Its massive trunk seemed to pulse with accumulated wisdom. I am not like the others, Chiamaka began without preamble. I am not here to ask you to rescue me from family problems or to use your reputation for my benefit. I am here because I recognize something in you that calls to something in me. Johnson found himself paying attention in a way he hadn't with the others. This was different. Go on, he said simply. When you speak, I hear the voice of someone who understands that faith is not just belief, it is revolutionary action. When you pray, I sense someone who knows that prayer changes the one praying as much as it changes circumstances. I have been preparing myself, not just academically but spiritually, to stand beside someone who will challenge the status quo. She paused, looking directly into his eyes with the fearlessness of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. I am not asking you to court me in the traditional sense. I am asking you to consider that perhaps your calling includes companionship with someone who shares your vision, someone who can strengthen rather than distract from your purpose. For the first time in years, Johnson felt his certainty waver. This was not the desperate plea of someone seeking security, nor the casual interest of someone attracted to his reputation. This was a proposal from an equal, a recognition of shared destiny. Chiamaka, he said slowly, what you offer honors me more than you know. But let me ask you this. Are you prepared for a path that may lead to rejection by the comfortable, criticism from the conventional, and demands that will test every aspect of your faith? I am from a family of warriors, she replied, her chin lifting with pride. My grandmother was one of the few women to successfully challenge the colonial courts and win. My mother built a business empire when people said women should only manage households. I was born ready for battles that others fear to fight. Johnson felt something he had not experienced before, not just attraction but recognition. Here was someone who might truly understand the weight he carried, the price of the path he was called to walk. Give me time to pray about this, he said finally. That night Johnson could not sleep. He found himself back at the small chapel, prostrate on the concrete floor, wrestling with God like Jacob at Peniel. The night was deep, the kind of African darkness that seemed to stretch back to the beginning of time. Lord, he whispered, I have been faithful to what I believed you were calling me to. But now I am confused. Is this woman a gift or a test? A partner or a distraction? The silence stretched on for hours. Then gradually images began to form in his mind, not dreams, but visions with the crystalline clarity of divine communication. He saw himself years in the future, standing before massive crowds, his voice carrying the authority of one who had paid the price for his message. He saw nations shaken by the words that would come through him, lives transformed, the comfortable disturbed and the disturbed comforted. But in the vision he stood alone. Then the scene shifted. He saw Chiamaka, older, more beautiful in the way that comes from walking with purpose. She stood before her own crowds, lawyers, judges, politicians, her voice like a sword cutting through corruption and injustice. Her power was different from his but no less significant. And in this vision too she stood alone. Both paths lead to greatness. A voice spoke, neither male nor female, ancient beyond measure. But not all great paths run parallel. Some callings require the complete sacrifice of personal desire for the sake of generational impact. The choice is before you now, shared joy and divided focus or singular purpose and maximum impact. Johnson wept then, not from sadness but from the overwhelming weight of clarity. He understood now why his grandmother had gripped his hand so tightly that last evening, why every attempt at conventional romance had felt like wearing clothes made for someone else. The next morning he found Chiamaka in the library, her law books spread around her like pieces of armor. She looked up as he approached, and he could see in her eyes that she already knew what he had come to say. You saw it too, didn't you? She said softly. He nodded, sitting across from her. In your prayers last night, you received your own answer. I did. Her voice was steady, but he could see the cost of acceptance in her eyes. We are both being prepared for battles that require our complete attention. To love each other would be to rob the world of what we might accomplish alone. They sat in silence for a moment, mourning the future they would not share even as they celebrated the clarity of their individual callings. Johnson, Chiamaka said finally, I want you to know that what I feel for you is real. But I also know that the highest form of love sometimes means stepping back so that the beloved can become all they are meant to be. And you, Chiamaka, have shown me what it means to recognize calling in another person. That recognition will strengthen me in the years to come. Years later, when Johnson had become Apostle Johnson Suleman, when his name was known across continents and his ministry had touched millions of lives, he would look back on his university years with profound gratitude. Each woman who had crossed his path had been a teacher, showing him different aspects of love, sacrifice, and purpose. Sarah had taught him that true kindness sometimes looks like rejection. Fatima had shown him that compatibility was not the same as calling. Aduni had demonstrated the difference between attraction and assignment. And Chiamaka, brilliant, beautiful Chiamaka, had given him the greatest gift of all, the confirmation that his solitary path was not a punishment but a privilege. Back in the hostel room that final evening of his university career, Emeka packed his belongings while Johnson sat quietly by the window. "Any regrets, my brother?" Emeka asked. Johnson watched the sun set over Auchi one last time as a student, painting the sky in the same ancestral colors that had greeted him 4 years earlier. But now he was different, not harder but refined by the fire of purpose. "None," he said simply. "I have learned that the greatest love stories are not always between a man and a woman. Sometimes they are between a soul and its destiny." The red dust of Auchi settled as evening approached, and somewhere in that dust were the footprints of a young man who had chosen the narrow path, not because he feared love, but because he loved something greater than his own comfort. In the distance, the call to prayer rose from the mosque while church bells chimed their evening song. Nigeria breathed around them in all its complexity, and Johnson breathed with it, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The sacred path had been chosen and he would walk it alone, not in loneliness but in the company of purpose, surrounded by the love of millions he had yet to meet, strengthened by the sacrifices he had made in seasons of preparation. This was why he never dated in university. This was the price and the privilege of answering when destiny calls your name. The story would continue, but the foundation had been laid in the red dust of Auchi, in the quiet nights of prayer, in the moments when a young man chose tomorrow's calling over today's comfort. And it was enough.